Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40k lore, where today we're going to have another look at the Sisters of Battle, or, well, actually, technically, another look at the Adepta Sororitas in general, and one of their non-militant orders. As, of course, I'm sure you're all aware, there's a lot more than the bolter bitches to the Adepta Sororitas, including dozens of non-militant orders like the Orders Dialogus, the Orders Sabine, or Vespelia, and one of the largest and most influential is the Orders Famulous. Besides, I've had this thing recently where I've been wanting to talk about how the Imperium isn't all bad. It's all too easy to get lost in the relentless grimdark of the universe, and there certainly is a whole lot of grimdark in the 41st millennium, but the Imperium is not some giant engine designed solely for suffering. Of course not. It is a human nation, a human empire, and if it weren't for the fact that it would collapse immediately and be devoured by ravenous hordes if it ever let its guard down, it could have existed quite happily. And the initial goal was actually to do just that, to create a galaxy-spanning utopia. Of course, those plans fell through, yet, nevertheless, there are still organizations within the Imperium that are dedicated to its growth and its prosperity. And one of those is the Orders Famulous, who make it their business to take care of the upper crust of the Imperium, the elites of society, the noble families upon whose shoulders so much responsibility rests. And yes, of course, on occasion, the responsibility for the fleur de lis of Imperial Nobility will also include a little bit of pruning. But just like the exterminatus of the God Emperor's most holy Inquisition, this is intended as a tool of last resort, to be used only in the most extreme of circumstances. And unfortunately, most of the stories of the 41st millennium tend to take place in extreme circumstances, and so the frequency of these tools tends to be somewhat overstated. But before I wander too far off into the weeds yet again, let's begin then. The Orders Famulous is one of the countless non-militant orders of the Adepta Sororitas. Their responsibility are to be advisors to Imperial Nobility, and the role of advisors is a far-reaching one. As a member of one of the countless cantons and lesser orders within the Orders Famulous, will be expected to be able to take care of both the diplomatic niceties of whatever house they are assigned to, and also their economic interests, whilst furthermore maintaining a long view of their bloodline and all of the other bloodlines in neighboring and local systems in order to create a healthy, stable, and preferably evolutionary dynasty. As, unfortunately, if left solely to their own devices, many of these proud, ancient, hereditary dynasties with histories spanning back millennia, well, they tend to engage in rather frightening quantities of active inbreeding. Something best avoided for multiple reasons, only some of them tied to the inevitable sharp decline in IQ. But the understanding of noble bloodlines goes further still, as many of the more ambitious and well-placed sisters engage in, well, outright eugenics experiments, in essence, in order to create a better kind of noble, a more suitable sort of heir. And on occasion, the most particularly motivated, eager, and/or deranged sisters have also worked with the Thorians, one of the rather radical sub-orders of the puritanical faction of the Inquisition, whose stated goal it is to find a body suitable for the reincarnation of the God Emperor. Yeah. We're getting into some next level eugenics here, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Let's, before we start talking about the theoretical reincarnation of the Emperor, deal with some of the more baseline concerns of a sister of the Orders Famulous. Beginning with the selection process. Regardless of whether or not they are members of the militant orders or the, I was about to say unarmed orders, but that's not technically true, the less lethal orders, I suppose, the non-martial orders, yes, that's a good way of putting it. All the sisters largely come from the same sources, either the various covenants or priories of the orders or from the Schola Progenium. Those sisters who seem like they might excel at languages is sent to the Ordo Dialogus. Those who seem suited for battle are sent to the Sisters of Battle. And those who appear to have a special gift for diplomacy, for etiquette, for history, for speech, are sent to the Ordo Famulous. Upon their arrival at the cloister, they are then given yet further instruction, first and foremost in things like imperial history, specifically that of the imperial noble houses they are expected to serve, depending upon the local sector in question. This is of vital importance, as you cannot expect to be able to conduct diplomacy or trade between these various houses who have histories stretching back millennia without a deep and profound understanding of their traditions, their way of doing things, their ways of viewing the world. Not just in allowing the sister to fit in, but also in allowing the sister to formulate their arguments and their positions in accordance with those of the house. You could have the greatest business idea in the world, but if you cannot communicate that to the 250-year-old nobleman who only speaks a specific dialect of High Gothic and has a very strident set of principles, who has been beaten into him by every preceding generation since the foundation of his house, well, to put it bluntly, unless you're speaking his language in a way that he finds pleasing, you're just not going to get anywhere. And this obviously only gets more complicated the more houses are involved in the equation. Let's say, for example, that there has been a long-standing rivalry between two houses, which have prevented a planet from ever reaching its true potential within the Imperium. These two factions are quibbling and bitching at one another constantly, incapable of working together for the greater glory of the Imperium. The only way to actually heal this rift is going to be to have a profound understanding of the reason for the rift to begin with, in addition to the ability to discover compromises that both houses can agree with, and crucially, without adding yet further fuel to the fire by miscommunicating a point, as in inflamed situations like these, a breach of protocol, or an unintended insult due to a lack of familiarity with local custom, well, could literally kick off a shooting war. So yeah, a lot of history lessons. These are then followed and supplemented with etiquette, as obviously high imperial society has a lot of stupid rules that have been produced over the course of, well, literally hundreds, if not thousands of years of very bored people trying to find some way to justify their existence. Especially in the case of older dynasties, there are going to be hundreds of various positions, hereditary or otherwise, that have been created over the house's lengthy history. People whose special job it is to fold laundry, or to take care of a particularly prized form of pet bird, or to carry a stick that is imbued with certain major political or religious significance to the system in question. Again, yet more history. And on top of that, you're also going to have specific local customs and points of etiquette, beyond that of the wider Imperium. On one world, for example, bowing to a superior is going to be an obvious thing. Of course you bow to the Count. Are you some sort of heathen savage, a barbarian from the wastelands? Whereas, say for example, on another world, that during its long history had a major uprising against its noble class, and essentially defeated the tyrant regime of yesteryears. On such a planet, bowing to a nobleman might actually be seen as a most hideous insult, as the old tyrants forced their servants to bow. Now you bow to me? Are you implying that I am a tyrant too? Etc., etc., etc. We have ample examples of that in our own world, where the courts of, say, 17th century France would be wildly different from 17th century Russia. So you can imagine the differences when we are talking about interplanetary distances. These etiquette lessons are then yet further reinforced with diplomacy. Because sometimes you're going to forget some piece of nonsensical trivia and you're going to step in it. In which case, you're going to have to make an argument for why you didn't step in it in bad faith, or to make an excuse or to smooth it over, etc. And furthermore, the art of diplomacy is going to be crucial in order to negotiate trade deals, in order to negotiate marriage contracts and alliances, or even simply making sure that one cousin doesn't stab the other because he got the slightly larger palace. And oh boy. Again, as any student of history will tell you, the familial bonds in royal families are virtually non-existent in many cases. You might find it difficult to believe that you'd ever want to kill your father with a stick. But for quite a few royal families throughout history, that was the wettest dream a second son could ever have. Yeah, a lot of inflamed ground that might need covering and smoothing over. In order to successfully do this, sisters are also given a great deal of teachings about human nature, the study of people. As if you are going to manage a noble family, and make no mistakes, that is the intended goal of one of these sisters, to manage a family and a lineage. You need to understand the component pieces of the greater whole. You need to be able to understand people, what makes them tick, why they act in the ways they do, so that you are able to predict them, able to steer them, and also able to, in essence, manipulate them. That is a somewhat negative-sounding word, but at the end of the day, that is the job. In many cases, one needs to turn a blind eye to certain proclivities. Say, for example, a noble has a nasty habit of occasionally abducting a village girl and torturing her in the basement for weeks on end. Well, it's a distasteful hobby, to be certain. However, if the aforementioned nobleman is actually effective at his role, if he is, say, a planetary governor or a high noble who manages the day-to-day business of his house or even his planet, his trade fleets, his innumerable responsibilities well, a peasant girl every now and then is not actually that high of a price to pay for a competent nobleman. Yes. Let's just say that a life lived in endless indulgences and luxuries doesn't tend to produce the most driven or excellent of individuals. So, sometimes the easiest thing to do is to just soundproof the basement. Again, on other occasions, on the other hand, you might have an inept ruler, in which case finding out if they have any vices of a publicly condemnable nature, then that might be an excellent way to shift them out of the path of an up-and-coming relative. Or even to take a far longer view. Okay, the current governor is rotten to the core, and his wife literally eats people. There's no real good answer here, and so the best solution will be to encourage the two to have a child, or to fix some dalliance to make sure that there is a child in general, and then raise that child to not be an enormous sadistic pervert like its parents. Another alternative, by the way, could also be to simply wipe out the entire family line, and that has also been done on more than one occasion, but there is a whole lot of work involved in doing that. It's not off the table, not by any stretch of the imagination, as indeed one of the things in which the sister will be trained in is how to spot heresy, how to spot corruption. Obviously, any sister of the order is going to be given extensive religious indoctrination? Training, instruction, yes, these are better terms. All the better to determine whether or not a family has, gone heretical or simply gone crazy, as there is a rather significant difference between the two. See, okay, let's assume yet again that this family is full of crazy people. The most expedient way to deal with that would be to raise a child in order to tamper down on the worst of the proclivities, or alternatively, even introduce a child from outside and then pass the child off as the honest and honorable heir, and therefore clean out the bloodline step by step. Now, the quicker option would be to contact the Inquisition and simply wipe out the entire family, but now you are undermining a key pillar of Imperial society. You are overnight wiping out a bloodline that might control cities, worlds, trade fleets, personal armies. The fallout can be rather titanic, and the rebuilding required even more so. It is simply better for the Imperium if a noble family that's gone astray can be gently ushered back into the fold, rather than eradicated. In the cases of actual heresy, on the other hand, or genetic hereditary mutation, another sign of heresy, then yes, absolutely, rack the bolts gun and get a purging. But in most other circumstances, slow change is the best kind of change. Now, taking this into consideration, you might be wondering why any noble family would ever accept a sister of the order into their dynasty. After all, their loyalties will always be first and foremost to the ecclesiarchy, rather than your own house. And this advisor does technically have the power to bring a bevy of bolter bitches down upon your head for, whatever infraction they consider serious enough. No matter how small the risk may seem, as obviously you're not a heretic, now are you? It's still a bit like inviting a hydrogen bomb home, and then entrusting your children to it. Well, the primary reason for allowing a member of the Orders Famulous into a dynasty is because all of that studying, all of those lessons, does actually pay off. The sisters that finished their education and become full members of the Orders Famulous are genuinely excellent advisors, capable of feats of diplomacy and mercantilism that would be far beyond most others trained in those very selfsame arts. As again, these sisters aren't merely educated in these things, they are specifically hand-plucked for aptitude and talent within these fields, who are then in turn given access to the best tutors that the near infinite influence of the ecclesiarchy can get a hold of. There are very real and very significant benefits to employing one of these sisters. Furthermore, you do not simply hire one of them. To obtain the services of one of the fully educated sisters, a sister Catiline, you must be offered their services by the mistress of the order. This means that there is quite a bit of honor involved as well, as it demonstrates to everyone else that your house is considered special, important, worthy of the Imperium's guidance, worthy even of the direct guidance of the God Emperor's most faithful subjects. The economic and diplomatic benefits to be reaped thereafter are bonuses. And once the order is fully established in an area, well, it is all too easy to use their success as a tool against other noble houses. If one house is given the privilege of a sister Catiline, and another house is not, the former house is very likely to see a long-term increase in its prestige and in its prosperity, especially if we measure this over the course of centuries or possibly even millennia, with various subsequent generations of sisters being sent to replace those who have gone before them. In many cases, larger and more prestigious houses are even offered several Catilines, who can then be given directives to take over various portions of the dynasty's business, or at the very least advise its own specialists on particularly important trade missions, or on establishing new routes of commerce, etc. The houses that have them, and those who do not, are likely to do significantly differently in terms of their success, which will encourage the other houses to ask for the similar blessing, and in return also be willing to more proactively pursue the lofty standards of purity demanded by the Adepta Sororitas. This, too, can be a valuable tool in the Orders Famulous' arsenal, essentially shaping a sector and a system on a larger scale, by making it not only a point of pride or privilege, but almost a necessity to have the services of one of these highly valued sisters. This power and prestige can then be yet further used to shape the entirety of Imperial society, at the very least within the specific area that the Order is operating in. See, initially, it might be difficult to convince a stubborn noble that no, you really should marry this other stubborn and absurdly obese noble instead of the other far more attractive one. But if this advice comes from a sister Catiline who has not only demonstrated in the past an ability to see your house's honor, privilege, and power soar, but who also knows that just because you're married doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for diversions, who might even be more than happy to help you engage in those diversions. Hell, who might even have a history of doing just that. Might even have a history of helping previous generations escape loveless marriages with ample mistresses, without ever disrupting the familial harmony of the house. Well, then everything gets a lot easier, because everyone will get what they want. The nobles will get to play hide the sausage with whomever they so choose, so long as they play at least one round with their less favored partner. And the sisters get their preferred match, for whatever arcane and diffuse reasons they may have. As this is, of course, where the larger scale eugenics come into play. This is somewhat reminiscent of a certain other inspiration, of course, of the 41st millennium, the Bene Gesserit of Dune, who kind of did exactly the same thing as the Orders Famulous is doing. But it's on several different levels. On one level, the Orders Famulous may simply seek a stable dynasty, which can be achieved simply by having an heir available, somebody who can pick up the crown whenever the family leader passes on. This alone, a clear line of succession, does wonders for the stability of any hereditary system. But once the order gets a bit more settled, there's a lot more interesting things that can be done. Say that one particular bloodline demonstrates a talent for organization. Perhaps this could be further brought out via clever matches. Mayhaps there is a merchant family who has also shown an equivalent talent, but isn't of sufficiently high birth. Okay. Arrange then first a marriage that will be suitably noble for everyone's tastes, so as to keep everything in order. Then organize a dalliance with a favored daughter of the mercantile family, along with a little bit of sabotage in the bedroom for the original newlyweds, and voila, you've got yourself a legitimate bastard with the best genes you could hope for. This, then, can also, as mentioned, grow even more ambitious, to the point where entire bloodlines will be bred specifically for certain standout features and or abilities, which can then be interwoven with other bloodlines to produce superior rulers, or at the very least, as far as genetics are concerned, have a significantly higher statistic likelihood of producing someone worthwhile, whilst also attempting to breed out other less desirable traits like sadomasochism, for example. Bloodlines may also be further manipulated over the course of many centuries and millennia of history, creating very specific outcomes and very specific children. As there are groups within the Orders Famulous, many times over the course of multiple generations, that have specific aims, like, for example, the birth of a saint. This is a lofty ambition, obviously, as how the hell do you even define what a saint is in any given circumstance? A saint of war? A saint of piety? What part of the genetic structure determines piety, and so on? Especially as you're also going to require a healthy dose of the God Emperor's approval in the midst of all of this. But a lot of this also comes down to opinion, to tradition, which can also be shaped over the millennia and the centuries by the presence of these advisors. And the even crazier ones, as mentioned, are the ones who work together with the Thorians in order to create a host body for the God Emperor's spirit. Obviously, nobody's ever succeeded with that before, but there are actually recorded instances of Imperial saints being predicted by the Orders Famulous. Individuals who were born to become become saints, who were born to become great, and indeed ended up becoming great. Now, perhaps this was all by simple accident, after all. If you keep breeding the same generations over and over again, with the same intent and the same characteristics, etc., sooner or later you're probably going to get lucky. But eugenics is a wonderful thing. Who can say what miracles it can create, if given enough time, direction, and extensive knowledge of one's family trees. And whilst, of course, the creation of saints and exceptional statesmen are, at the end of the day, always going to be a rarity, something that requires as much luck as it does planning, there are other, far more predictable benefits as well. Increasing the competitive abilities of an imperial house, increasing its prosperity, making it more wealthy, powerful, building imperial society is a good thing. Undoubtedly so. To spread that wealth, to build a better world and ensure that it is led by those most capable and hopefully of the correct temperament to do so, well, it's a blessing. An obvious one at that, and one with potentially far-reaching consequences. Not to mention simple stability. It is easy to overlook in our age of, well, rampant and widespread relative stability, how important that actually is. Despite all of the nonsense currently going on, we are still living in a period of absolutely unprecedented peace. Well, unless you go back 20 years in time, but you get my drift. Whereas the Imperium, well, you have feudal worlds, you have warring dynasties, you have trade families that have had centuries-long conflicts with one another. You have entire planets that have descended into civil war against one another for decades at a time, endangering not only the planet, but the wider Imperium by making it more difficult for that world to meet its obligations to the Imperium, to pay its imperial tithe. Avoiding all of this can only be a good thing. And should the worst happen, the most unthinkable, the most horrible, should one of these families decide that the Imperium is no longer the best way forward, but that there are other powers out there in the great dark void that might serve their interests better, then who could possibly be better placed to correct their mistakes, either through occasional targeted assassinations, a poisoned glass of wine, or an unfortunate accident on a castle balcony, than a trusted and beloved advisor, somebody who has always been there and has always looked out for the family's best interests first. As it is very important to remember that, again, the sisters' loyalty does not lie with the dynasty. Their loyalties lie with the Imperium, with the God Emperor, with the Ministorum, and the Ecclesiarchy. And, frequently, the Inquisition. No matter how useful a Sister Catalan might be, one should also never forget that they're basically a listening device. A listening device that knows every one of your darkest secret, whose job it is, in fact, to know all of those secrets, and whose primary purpose in life is to help your sector thrive, not you personally. And whilst this is a tremendous amount of power, of course, for the Sisters Catalan, it also means that if they ever trip, if they ever stumble in their job, if they ever fail to see a sign of creeping corruption, well, guess who? A dynasty who's about to turn away from the light of the God Emperor is going to aim to eliminate first. Life in the 41st millennium is, as ever, complicated. But it is nice to know that there are at least someone out there, some groups of people who are, at least supposed, to be making life better for people and the Imperium at large. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.